And he'd taken me to see several Stone concerts here in the garden.
Well, yes, I've been there every year. The Senate, Mrs. Eisenhower gives a lunch to the Senate ladies.
Lee Radziwill died in her Manhattan apartment in February 2019. Everyone thought she was broke. The Kennedy family believed she was selling jewelry just to pay bills. But 5 weeks later, lawyers revealed a shocking secret. Lee had hidden a $50 million fortune from everyone. Even more surprising was what she did with it. She rewrote her will just months before dying, and the person she chose to inherit everything will leave you speechless. This wasn't just about money. It was the final move in a decades-long family war that started with Jackie Kennedy. She was born Caroline Lee Bouvier on 30 March 1933. The birth took place at Doctors Hospital in Manhattan, a place known for catering to New York's wealthiest families. But even in that elite setting, her arrival caused a stir. Her father, John Blackjack Bouvier, was a Wall Street broker with more confidence than cash. He walked in wearing a camel hair coat he couldn't afford and handed out cheap cigars. He demanded that his daughter's birth be printed in the New York Times, a status move that cost $16, nearly $350 today. As her mother Janet recovered, Blackjack sent out 48 birth announcements on Tiffany stationery, stamped with a gold family crest. That crest, believed to be from French royalty, was actually bought for $451 from a shop in Manhattan. By nightfall, word had spread along Park Avenue. The Bouvier now had 2 daughters who would turn heads for both beauty and money. Jacqueline was already 4 and called the Incomparable. Now there was Lee. Lee's father quickly became famous for his bad behavior. Between 1935 and 1939, private detectives caught him having 23 affairs. His lovers included 3 showgirls, a Brooklyn heiress, and a married yachtswoman he met at the Belmont Stakes. He bragged that he could drink a quart of scotch and still charm a woman by midnight. Lee was only 7 when she heard her mother crying after finding a pawn ticket for Blackjack's sapphire cufflinks. He had used them to fund a secret trip to Havana with a showgirl. Lee grew up surrounded by this chaos. Her nannies swapped stories about her father like they were fairy tales. Later in life, she was drawn to men who reminded her of him, men with money, titles, or wild reputations. She told Truman Capote once, "Daddy taught me 2 things: champagne before noon and never expect fidelity." By the time she turned 17, Lee had become a name in her own right. On Christmas Day in 1950, Life magazine published a full-page feature on her debut. The photo was taken by Milton H. Green. She wore a white satin gown inspired by Dior that cost $900 and had over 400 pearls sewn into it. Her mother ordered 2,000 prints of the photo to send as holiday cards. The postage alone cost more than a typical family's rent for the month. The magazine received over 1,300 letters asking about the tiara, which had been borrowed from Aunt Edith Beale, who would later become famous in Grey Gardens. That year, there were nearly 2,000 debutantes in the U.S., but Life editors privately ranked Lee as #1 for photogenic appeal. At one event in Philadelphia, another girl was described as pretty, but no Lee Bouvier. The attention made Jackie uneasy. She told a friend that the world had crowned Cinderella before her stepsister even showed up to the ball. Her nickname, Lee, was not just a cute shortening. Her mother had chosen it to preserve her own maiden name and ensure it appeared in newspapers. At Miss Porter's school in Connecticut, Lee joined a group of wealthy girls being prepared to marry into European nobility. The school charged $1,400 a year, triple the cost of an Ivy League semester. In her classes, Lee earned high marks in the decorative arts of the French monarchy, but failed anything that involved managing money. One classmate remembered that Lee practiced curtsies in front of a mirror, while another timed her dips with a stopwatch. The girls kept scrapbooks of eligible bachelors. Lee's included European aristocrats, like the Duc de Brissac, and the Earl of Dalkeith. By the time she graduated in 1951, she could set a formal table for 18, name 42 French cheeses by smell, and recite how to address every royal family in Europe. Her mother was thrilled. This was exactly what she had in mind. The Bouvier family lived like royalty, but it was all smoke and mirrors. The family income came from firewood, old rental properties, and timber. It had started to fall apart during the Depression. Tax records show that Blackjack's brokerage lost more than $200,000 between 1930 and 1940, worth about $4 million today. He kept up appearances by borrowing money from his wife's trust fund, staying at luxury hotels, and hiring drivers. The Bouvier name was supposed to trace back to French nobility, but in truth, it came from Michel Bouvier, a cabinet maker in Philadelphia, who once traded firewood with Dolly Madison. Lee herself wrote a school essay about her imaginary ancestor at Versailles and got an A-. The family crest was copied out of a French book and had no legal right to be used. Still, everything around Lee sparkled. Her world looked rich, but it was built on borrowed money and good acting. Lee was just 20 years old when she decided to marry Michael Temple Canfield. The wedding took place on 18th of April 1953 at her stepfather Hugh Auchincloss's estate. The whole thing was rushed. Only 8 weeks after their engagement, 700 guests attended. Society columns called it a storybook romance. But in private, Lee admitted she just wanted to leave home. Her father arrived drunk. Jackie had to walk him through the gardens to keep him from making a scene. Even the ceremony was hurried. There was no formal reception. After saying their vows, Lee and Michael left immediately for the airport and boarded an evening flight to London. Michael came from a powerful publishing family, but there were whispers that he might be more than just a Canfield. Some believed he was the secret son of Prince George, Duke of Kent, and Alice Preston, a glamorous American who was addicted to drugs and known for injecting morphine at parties. She died in 1946 after jumping from a hotel window. Prince George had already died in a plane crash in 1942. According to old gossip, their child had been quietly adopted and renamed Michael Canfield. Even Michael's second wife said the Duke of Windsor once stared at him across a lunch table and muttered, "I'm certain your husband is my brother's son." The rumor followed him everywhere. It added a strange royalty to his name and a shadow he could never escape. Lee's family had doubts about the match. Her stepfather said quietly before the ceremony, "He'll never be able to afford her." Her mother worried about Michael's $9,000 salary, which would be about $105,000 today. That wasn't enough for Lee's clothes, let alone a glamorous lifestyle in Manhattan. Even Jackie joked that her sister would need either a prince or a publisher with more shares. Lee proved them right almost immediately. The morning after the wedding, she sorted her gifts. Some were kept for New York, the rest returned. When her bridal bouquet wilted in the heat, she demanded fresh flowers at triple the cost. Her spending wasn't temporary, it was who she was. 6 months later, the couple moved to London. Michael took a modest job with Harper's there, and Lee dove into the social scene. She hosted over 40 dinner parties in 1 year, joined elite clubs, and bought 3 expensive gowns in 1 week, all charged to Michael's account at Harrods. She imported dogs and an American fridge, paying more than £1,800 in customs fees. That alone was more than 4 months of his salary. Michael borrowed money to keep up. Lee told Truman Capote that she preferred titles over fortunes. By 1957, she was spending at least £8,000 a year on clothes, 6 times what Michael earned. People at his office whispered he was editing books by day to fund parties by night. She was only 26 when she walked into a London registry office wearing powder blue, still tangled in the remains of a marriage the Catholic Church hadn't forgiven. Her name was Lee Bouvier, freshly divorced but not yet annulled, and the man waiting beside her was Prince Stanislaw Radziwill. On paper, their union wasn't fully legal. Behind the scenes, the Kennedys scrambled to convince the Vatican to wipe away her past. It took more than 3 years, but none of that mattered in the moment. Traffic outside Caxton Hall stopped. Cameras flashed more than 30,000 times, and by the time she stepped into her new home just down the street from Buckingham Palace, people were already calling her Princess. The newspapers had a field day. They pointed out that Polish titles hadn't meant anything since 1921, but it didn't slow the spectacle. Oleg Cassini's old assistant made her dress. She smiled like she belonged in a royal fairy tale. And yet, behind the veil was something messier. Because the prince wasn't exactly free either. He was still married to a Swiss banking heiress named Grace Colin when he and Lee started their affair the year before. Grace found out the way people always do in high society, by reading the gossip columns. She filed for divorce in November. Headlines from Zurich to London shouted about the broken marriage. Grace was cast aside, but she didn't stay down for long. Within 2 years, she married the Earl of Dudley. Meanwhile, Lee was splashed across covers of every major magazine. Paris Match, Life, Tatler. She wasn't just a new princess, she was a scandal, and everyone was watching. Barely 4 months after the wedding, Lee gave birth to her son Anthony in Lausanne. The next year, her daughter Tina was born in New York. John F. Kennedy, then president-elect, sent a telegram saying the baby had been born into 2 republics and 1 extinct kingdom. But motherhood never slowed her down. By 1963, Lee had flown more than 120,000 miles, more than any woman in America who didn't work for an airline. She hired multilingual nannies to care for the children while she bounced between London and Manhattan. Her son would go on to win a Peabody Award before dying of cancer at 40. Her daughter stayed private and inherited everything, $50 million, when Lee died. To outsiders, she seemed like the perfect mother. Birthday parties at Claridge's, designer sailor suits. But inside the family, the staff had another name for the kids. They called them the photo op children. Because no matter how dressed up they were, the real competition was always with her sister Jackie. In 1962, that rivalry reached another level. Jackie invited Lee to join her on a diplomatic tour of India and Pakistan. For Lee, it was a personal runway. She turned traditional Indian saris into elegant evening wear. She changed outfits 22 times in 9 days. Photographers started calling her the White Maharani. In Lahore, the president of Pakistan gave her a horse. Crowds cheered louder for her than they did for the political meetings. Even the photos from that trip would later sell at auction for almost $50,000. And while world tensions built back home, Lee turned a sisterly invitation into a global fashion victory. But the royal life was never stable. By the mid-60s, her marriage was falling apart. Stas was off with models and movie stars. Lee began her own quiet affairs. By 1963, they had 11 homes just to keep their schedules and lovers separate. Money was always a problem. Lee had a trust fund, but she outspent it constantly. Jackie had to cover some of her bills, joking that Lee's spending was as endless as the Radziwill history. And no matter how far she flew, people still introduced her as Jackie's sister. Even her husband got dragged into it. During JFK's 1960 campaign, he visited 42 cities in 20 days, trying to sway Polish-American voters. Their marriage officially ended in 1974. She filed for divorce, citing misconduct. He was photographed with a young French model. She wore halston and held her head high, but the fairy tale was over. She was 40, financially stretched, and for the first time in years, simply Lee again. Then came Truman Capote. In 1967, he put his own novel aside to focus on her. He believed she could be a star. Not just any star, a rival to Jackie. He saw her insecurities, her jealousy, and believed he could turn them into fuel. He got her acting lessons, screen tests, even promised to rewrite Breakfast at Tiffany's around her. Lee was 34, with no acting experience, but Truman thought her hunger would be enough. The first test was in Chicago. She performed the Philadelphia story on stage. Tickets sold out in 2 days. Celebrities lined up, but the critics were brutal. One said she sounded like she was reading a safety card. Another described the audience physically wincing. Capote left the theater early. The production lost more than $65,000. The Broadway plans were canceled before they started. Still, Truman pushed on. He got her a starring role in a television remake of Laura. 38 million people watched it, but the reviews were even worse. She was called the worst actress of the season. Newspapers were savage. The production aired once, then disappeared forever. That's when the prince stepped in. He warned her that if she embarrassed the family again, he might take the children. There was nothing official, but the threat worked. Within weeks, Lee dropped out of a new stage production and told reporters she was stepping away from acting. She never returned. Capote later said that ultimatum killed the dream. But in truth, Lee had already started to lose faith. She kept a notebook during rehearsals, writing things like "forgettable" and "why bother if not adored." She asked friends if polite applause meant she was invisible. When her TV performance was panned, she locked herself in her hotel room for 2 days, listening to the broadcast over and over again. She circled the lines she thought she had delivered well, but the damage was done. That same year, she faced an even deeper betrayal. She had been dating Aristotle Onassis. Her marriage was fading, and she saw in him a way to reclaim the spotlight and perhaps finally outshine Jackie. He was rich beyond imagination. His yacht was over 300 feet long. She visited his island, stayed on his boat, and began using stationery with the name Lee B. Onassis. But in the fall of 1963, everything shifted. During a cruise with both sisters on board, Onassis gave Jackie a diamond and ruby necklace worth $250,000. Lee got 2 charm bracelets worth about $250,000. When she tried to protest, he told her Jackie needed legends. The moment humiliated her. Even years later, she would shake the bracelets in front of friends, still angry. In October 1968, the final blow came. Onassis called Lee out of nowhere. He was marrying Jackie. In 3 days, she wasn't invited. She had hosted them, supported them, and now she was being replaced. The ceremony took place on his island. 45 guests. 7 minutes. The press painted Jackie as a fairy tale widow. Lee was left behind. That night, Lee called Truman Capote in tears. The call lasted more than an hour. She kept asking how her sister could do this to her. Truman listened, but later used the story in his novel. Lee never forgave him. Jackie's marriage to Onassis cemented the divide between them. Financially, Jackie became co-owner of a fleet of oil tankers. Lee's divorce left her with only $50,000. Jackie got headlines, magazine covers, and the kind of wealth few ever touch. Lee drifted between borrowed homes, clinging to memories. In 1976, Lee Radziwill was 42 years old and still recovering from a public failure. Her acting debut in a remake of Laura had ended in disaster when the show closed in less than a week. But now she was sitting in her Fifth Avenue apartment, announcing something new. She had launched her own business. It was called Lee Radziwill Inc., and it was all about interior design. Her very first project wasn't small. The Americana hotel chain hired her to redesign 2 presidential suites, one in Florida and the other in Mexico. These suites cost over $225 per night, which would be about $1,200 today. She told the press she was doing everything on her own, from concept to installation, but admitted her phone bill had already crossed $2,000 just from fabric orders. The New York Times made sure to mention she wasn't using her married name. She wanted to be hired for her work, not her title. Her biggest breakthrough didn't come from hotel projects. It came from letting photographers inside her homes. When Ella Decor republished photos of her Paris apartment and New York duplex in 2009, readers were stunned. One room was covered entirely in bold Chinese-style cotton. Another had gold-framed mirrors next to delicate watercolors. Her dining table was surrounded by French chairs once owned by a famous decorator. People were fascinated. They started calling her Office. So many calls that her assistant had to say there was a 6-month wait just to get a color plan. For the first time, Lee wasn't just seen as someone with good taste. She was being paid for it. Giorgio Armani noticed too. In 1983, he gave her the title Director of Special Events. It was vague on purpose. She helped choose guests for fashion shows, advised celebrities on what to wear, and helped plan events that blended fashion and society. One Paris show could bring in $5 million worth of media buzz, and Armani's staff joked that Lee did half the work just by being in the front row. In 3 years, she organized 27 parties, always with exactly 140 guests. She said that was the most a hostess could greet without seeming bored. Her travel budget alone was over $100,000 a year. Armani later said she was the one who helped his brand connect with movie stars and important people in culture. That kind of influence couldn't be bought. It had to be lived. Interior design gave Lee something she'd never had before, a world where her sister Jackie's fame didn't overshadow her. She'd grown up around fine things in Italy, England, and Greece, but people once mocked her for having too much style and not enough purpose. Now that same style was making her money. By 1980, she charged $300 an hour. She even installed a full-room setup at Lord & Taylor, something no non-licensed designer had done before. She preferred quiet, understated luxury. That phrase, anonymous luxury, became a motto in the design world, and it helped her make 6 figures without having to be in the spotlight. Still, her personal life kept falling apart. In late 1974, British tabloids reported she had filed for divorce from Prince Stanislaw after 15 years of marriage. There were rumors she had been seeing a photographer and that her husband had his own affairs. The settlement was rough. She kept their estate but accepted just £120,000, about $2 million today, and gave up any claims to land in Poland, which had already been taken by the communist government. He died of a heart attack 2 years later, leaving their children, Anthony and Christina, heartbroken. That same year, while her hotel projects were launching, she had to pawn a Cartier cigarette case just to fix the roof on her estate. The gap between her public image and private struggles followed her for years. She tried to escape it all by spending time at Andy Warhol's compound in Montauk. He and Paul Morrissey had bought the place for $235,000, and Lee was their first summer guest. She brought Jackie and her kids, and even Mick and Bianca Jagger showed up. Warhol hated fresh air, but he stayed nearby and took Polaroids of Lee in a bright orange caftan. That photo shoot led to a silkscreen portrait that later sold for over $800,000. Warhol said the painting had to fade over time, but Lee wouldn't. One night, she hosted a beach party and played a scandalous movie on the side of a barn. They drank 47 bottles of Dom Perignon. Warhol wrote it all down in his diary, and the page alone sold at auction for $12,500. Lee's love life was just as complicated. After her divorce, she dated architect Richard Meyer, who offered to build her a glass house that would have cost $680,000. When she hesitated, he joked that a princess didn't belong in a split level. Then came Peter Beard. They met in Kenya and connected instantly. She wore his camera around her neck like a necklace at Studio 54. He took photos of her and once sold a collage for over $350,000. There were other men, heirs, bankers, socialites, but none lasted. One even asked her to sign a prenup that limited her to $10 million, and she ended it. She once said she'd rather be poor than bored. She carried a jeweler's lens to dinner just to inspect cufflinks. Anything less than 18-karat gold was beneath her. In 1988, she married again. This time it was Herbert Ross, a film director whose movies had made more than $500 million worldwide. They married in her apartment with only a few close friends present. Even Jackie slipped in quietly. On paper, it looked perfect. He had directed major hits like Footloose and Steel Magnolias, and Lee was suddenly married to someone whose work had won 8 Oscars. But she quickly realized she didn't belong in Hollywood. She hated the culture. She skipped set visits, avoided red carpets, and found herself setting tables instead of shaping scripts. Ross was making $1 million a day directing. She was still earning under $150,000 a year from her design jobs. The glamour was real, but it wasn't hers. They stayed married for 13 years, but the final stretch was rough. Ross got sick in 2001 and checked himself out of the hospital too soon. He asked Lee to move to Los Angeles to care for him, but she refused. They separated. When the divorce became final, she was only in court for 8 minutes. He died 3 weeks later with his brother by his side. Lee was left $250,000 from a $10 million estate. Some said it was a goodbye. Others said it was a warning. Even during that time, she kept designing and dressing to stay relevant. In 1990, she convinced a famous Italian decorator to redo her Paris apartment. It later sold for over $1 million just for the fabrics. In 1994, she took a new job with Armani and flew more than 120,000 miles in a single year. She joined the International Best Dressed list in 1996 and kept making waves in fashion into her 60s. Her red Armani top at a film premiere had only 2 hidden snaps, but it turned heads. Being married to Ross gave her financial security. She no longer worried about old debts. She moved into a 14-room apartment and drove a Jaguar XJ8 leased in her own name. For a woman once overshadowed by her sister and famous in-laws, these were small but meaningful wins, but she still felt empty. She later admitted that marrying into Hollywood didn't fix anything. After Ross died, she went back to using Radziwill. She sold the Jaguar, and she started writing a memoir. She didn't say much about her marriage in it. That silence said more than words ever could. Lee Radziwill took her final breath late at night on February 15, 2019, at her Manhattan apartment on East 72nd Street. She was 85. By then, her health had already declined, and those close to her had braced for the moment. But what no one expected was the surprise that came 5 weeks later. Her estate filing revealed a fortune expected to exceed $50 million. It shocked even the Kennedy family, many of whom had assumed Lee had been selling her personal items just to keep up with the co-op bills. Some believed she was running low on cash, but the truth was something else entirely. The wealth came from a mix of sources. A trust her mother set up in 1975. The remains of a $19 million divorce settlement from her ex-husband, Hollywood director Herbert Ross. Jewelry insured for $3.4 million. Artwork valued at $7 million, including a Cy Twombly painting she had once nearly pawned to cover a $180,000 tax bill. She had sold her Paris apartment 2 years earlier, and now her will called for her Manhattan apartment to be sold too. It was clear Lee had planned every step with care. While many thought she was relying on fashion brand advances or licensing deals just to get by, she had quietly rebuilt her fortune behind the scenes. 5 months before she died, on September 20th, 2018, Lee met with her lawyers and signed a new will. It was 16 pages long. It canceled every previous version, and it left everything to her only living child, Anna Christina Radziwill. That single sentence, written in her own handwriting, left no doubt about her intentions. She had already updated a trust the year before to match this plan, combining assets from 3 other family trusts into one. Tina, as everyone called her, was also given legal power to manage or shift that money in the future, but only to her own children, and only in ways that protected it from spouses or creditors. Estate planners were stunned. At 85, most people wouldn't attempt such a drastic legal move. But Lee had a paper trail, a doctor's letter proving she was mentally sound, a video of the will signing. Everything had been locked down. When the court opened probate in March 2019, there was no argument. Tina got it all. But there was one name no one could ignore by its absence: Carol Radziwill, the widow of Lee's only son, Anthony. Carol had helped care for Anthony when he was dying from cancer in the late 90s. Years later, she became well known through her appearances on reality TV. But Lee's will didn't mention her even once. Carol had written a memoir called What Remains, which painted a distant portrait of Lee. Friends said that caused the final break. Carol's public tribute to Lee on Instagram came 2 days after her death. It was polite, but not warm. When the probate records showed she wouldn't receive even a single heirloom, it made things clear. Under the law, Lee didn't have to leave anything to Carol, and she didn't. If Carol had inherited, she could have claimed the title Princess Carol. Lee made sure that never happened. The surprise didn't stop there. Lee also left out Caroline Kennedy and her 3 children. That silence stood in sharp contrast to what Jackie had done in 1994. When she died, she left $500,000 each to Lee's children, and she had supported Lee financially for years. So when Lee chose not to leave anything to Jackie's daughter and grandchildren, it felt like a reversal of that generosity. Caroline had always stayed close. She gave the eulogy at Anthony's funeral. She visited Lee every Thanksgiving. But some believed the decision was about money, not emotion. Dividing the estate among 5 people would have triggered millions more in taxes. Others believed it was the final mark of a lifelong sibling rivalry. The tabloids didn't hold back. One headline said, "Lee used her will like a stiletto, cutting the Kennedy name out completely." Even in death, Lee made bold, unexpected choices. Instead of naming Tina or any Kennedy family member as executors, she chose 2 outsiders: Hamilton South, a public relations expert, and Martin B. O'Connor, a lawyer who had helped her manage property sales in her final years. These were people she trusted, not relatives, not old family names. And for their work, they would be entitled to up to 4% of the estate's value. On $50 million, that could mean as much as $2 million each.